Hello, BookTube. It's September, and that means ShakeTube. This is a venerable BookTube event that Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse has been doing for years. He's been inviting people along. Myself and Lukash at Totally Pretentious have been co-hosts for a long time. We have Rainey joining us this year. She has actual Shakespeare acting experience. And as a result, we have a great event. An event that I want to stress has parameters among its ShakeTube hosts, right? We're all reading separate plays and discussing them week by week, and then at the end of the month we will do a huge Zoom conversation about Hamlet. That last month or the month before that, when thinking about that, I would have issued a caveat. I would have said, if the technology gods are smiling on us, we will do a Zoom conversation. But I'm not saying that anymore, because in the meantime, I have cracked the Zoom technology myself. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. We can certainly make a Zoom conversation happen, and it will be delightful, where we all talk about Hamlet. But in the meantime, before we do that, we are for the month of September doing a sort of a la carte approach. We're not talking about the same play every single week, just the four of us. Instead, each person is doing different things each weekend for ShakeTube. And the first thing that I want to stress about this is that ShakeTube is designed to get you to read Shakespeare, to enjoy this. This is a tremendously enjoyable author. You do not need to read any of the specific works that we are reading. You can pull down Shakespeare and read anything you want. We're just adding a note of celebration of Shakespeare to the month. That's all. If you want to follow along with our specific read-alongs, that's just fine, because those videos are always fascinating. And we have a Voxer group set up to chat about ShakeTube, and I had no idea what I wanted to do for ShakeTube 2020. I had no idea. Unlike my co-hosts, I have taught these things, a great number of them, a great many times to students. So, and tackled them many, many times on my own. I believe there's at least one ShakeTube co-host of mine who hasn't even read all of Shakespeare. It's the joy of the exploration that is the key of it all, and that should be true for you as well. But you can see that it gives me a little bit of an embarrassment of choices, where I'm looking at these things thinking, I have no idea what I want to talk about. I could talk about Macbeth all month long. I could do 4 different discussions of Macbeth. So I have no idea. And in that moment of weakness, Jason swooped in and assigned me readings. He assigned me my bits and pieces for 2020 ShakeTube. And I got to confess, as much as I gripe about it, a part of me liked it so much that I will probably do the same thing next year. Next year, I'll probably let Rainey pick my plays, or I'll let Lukash do it, because it really doesn't make any difference to me. There's plenty to talk about anything. And we're certainly going to put that to the test with my first ShakeTube, with all of my ShakeTube videos, aside from the last one, because Jason went out of his way to make life difficult for me. He went out of his way to do that. He chose things that he wanted to see me talk about, but they aren't Roman history plays at all. So the thing that I am doing today, my first ShakeTube video of the month, is not a play at all. It's a poem. It's by far the most popular thing that Shakespeare ever wrote. It's Venus and Adonis, which he brought out as a little book in 1593, and it was available at booksellers. It was available in bookselling yards. It was available in their barrows, and it took off. People loved it. It was a huge success. It was dedicated to a person whose name, the Earl of Southampton, whose name is famously debated as to how you pronounce it. It's Henry Reesley in Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall books, where he is so fond of telling people, call me Reesley, that Cromwell ends up referring to him as simply call me, with capital C and capital M. It's possible that it was pronounced some other way, so we'll just call him Southampton. And he was a gorgeous young nobleman, and Shakespeare dedicated this play to him, and called it the first fruit of his invention, implying that it was the first thing he ever set forth for publication. Certainly, it was the most popular thing that he ever did. It was reprinted many times in his own lifetime, in a time when that wasn't exactly normal. So lots and lots of people read this. It's a long poem. It's 100 lines over 1,000. It's a long poem in which the goddess Venus falls in love with a beautiful boy named Adonis and tries to seduce him. And there's all sorts of elaborate Elizabethan wordplay, elaborate Elizabethan idea play. The typical gimmicks of Elizabethan love poetry are on full display all throughout the thing. It's an ABA rhyme scheme, so that there's a very noticeable rhyming rhythm to the thing, and it's extremely well done. It's extremely professional. It's smooth. It reads like someone who has done this a lot. But it lacks the outward look of Shakespeare's plays. Now, Shakespeare's plays, they are telling a story. They're very much involved in stagecraft. They're very much involved in what works to get actor A off stage long enough for him to change costume and come back as actor B. And they very much care about that internal thing. They are working towards a conclusion. But despite what you may have seen in things like Shakespeare in Love, they aren't really... Shakespeare's plays look out. They look out at you. They're doing all of those internal things. They're moving actors around. They're getting all sorts of things done in terms of plot and revelation and whatnot. But they are also very much paying attention to reactions. They were built that way and refined that way, constantly with an eye looking outward. And Shakespeare's poems don't do that. They don't look outward. And that can be a jarring experience for someone who knows Shakespeare from his plays, or even from the sonnets, which are, of course, addressed to a living reader. So they necessarily look outward. But the poems don't do that. They may be dedicated to Southampton, but they don't look outward at all. They are contained, almost claustrophobic literary experiences. You have to be willing to look at them that way. Certainly the bulk of Elizabethan poetry is like that. So it won't be hard to do, especially if you read these things in a literary anthology. But they don't feel like Shakespeare. They feel... the number one word that I've had is disappointing. They feel disappointing. I've had many, many students tell me, well, I read it, but it didn't feel to me like Shakespeare cared whether I read it or not. And that's a neat way to put it, but that is definitely true. There is something to that. So you have to be ready for that. If you're going to read Venus and Adonis, and you probably should, it won't take you long at all to do, but if you're going to read it, you have to be ready for that. Same thing with the Rape of Lucrece. You have to be ready for a different kind of Shakespeare. A Shakespeare who is not performing for you. Not in the sense that the plays are done. If you're willing to do that, there is quite a bit of technical proficiency that you can find in these poems. The Venus and Adonis was adapted from a story in Ovid, from Ovid's Metamorphoses. We won't get into the exact provenance of that story or the likelihood that Shakespeare would have known it. We'll just say it's adapted from that story. I won't lose any time in saying that Ovid's story is done better. It's not only more enjoyable, but it is metrically, poetically, it is infinitely superior to Shakespeare. But Shakespeare's can still be pretty good. I want to read you a bit, because there's another element involved. There's another element going on in Venus and Adonis that I don't think is going to be hard for you to pick out. Certainly, if you're familiar with the sonnets, it's not going to be hard for you to pick out. This is Venus speaking. Were I hard-favored, foul, or wrinkled old, ill-nurtured, crooked, churlish, harsh in voice, o'erworn, despised, rheumatic, and cold, thick-sighted, barren, lean, and lacking juice, then mightst thou pause, for then I were not for thee. But having no defects, why dost thou abhor me? Thou canst not see one wrinkle in my brow. Mine eyes are grey and bright and quick in turning. My beauty is the spring, as the spring doth yearly grow. My flesh is soft and plump, my marrow burning. My smooth moist hand, were it with thy hand felt, would in thy palm dissolve, or seem to melt. Bid me discourse, I will enchant thine ear, or like a fairy trip upon the green, or like the nymph with long dishevelled hair, dance on the sands, and yet no footing seen. Love is a spirit all compact of fire, not gross to sink, but light, and will aspire. That is the irresistible goddess of love, the most beautiful of all the Olympians, trying to woo this beautiful boy who's obviously not interested, or not all that interested in her. And it's an easy thing to read into plaints like that. They run throughout most of the poem. Most of the poem is that kind of silly, over-the-top, what am I missing? What does she have that I don't have? The kind of complaining. You get that a lot in the sonnets as well, and it's easy to read. It's easy to impose upon that. You're not stretching the blanket at all to impose upon that the complaints of a slightly older man to a beautifully younger man. It's easy, in other words, to read throughout Venus and Adonis a very active homoerotic element. That Venus is not just because of the language, although the language is very much there in the sonnets as well. That a person who's slightly defensive about their attractions, their physical attractions, right? If you weren't defensive about your physical attractions, you wouldn't have to say any of those things. You wouldn't have to run down an inventory. It's only if you're defensive, a little bit insecure, that you would say those things. And you would say them to someone who has much more of that than you do, justifying. What Venus is essentially saying in that passage is, I'm not so bad. The implication being, yes, I'm not as pretty as you are, but I'm not chuck roast. You wouldn't kick me out of bed for eating crackers. I'm still good enough. Right? Which is, I'm still good enough for you is a sentiment that runs through quite a few of the sonnets and has always been read as the older and balding Shakespeare plaintively saying this to his beautiful young nobleman. Whether or not any of that is true, whether or not Shakespeare ever met the Earl of Southampton or not, it doesn't matter. That is the literary sort of gimmick that's going on here, and it's easy to read in that gimmick an element of homoeroticism. And it's not just it's what am I, why don't I measure up? I measure up, don't I still got it. This is essentially what so much of this poem is saying. I still got it. It's not just that, it's also that in the context of the poem, the sentiments are unbelievable in any other context. The immortal goddess of love from Mount Olympus would not need to say any of this stuff. It would not need to happen. It's unbelievable in the context of the story unless there's some other conversation going on, perhaps a conversation between Shakespeare and Southampton. One way or another, I'm going to reference this poem and other works like it a few other times in the rest of ShakeTube. And I don't know what the rest of my hosts are doing. You have to keep in mind, well, this is a caveat that I give you often. I want to make sure that if you spend a lot of time on this channel, you might forget it. And don't get me wrong, I am so happy for your company every day. But I want to stress, I often make this point in connection with, for instance, Mark Richardson, but I want to stress, my ShakeTube co-hosts have lives, okay? They take classes, they go to work, they have significant others, they have extended family, they have all sorts of adult responsibilities. So if they only make their weekend videos and then our collective Zoom conversation, that's just fine. I, on the other hand, might make more Shakespeare videos. I might make a few. In fact, I don't think I've done a Shakespeare starter kit. I certainly would like to devote a whole video to talking about Shakespeare pastiche fiction. There are a whole bunch of things that I could do, and I think I will do them all for ShakeTube 2020. I just want to add the caveat that A, you shouldn't expect that from my other ShakeTube co-hosts, and B, there'd be good reason if they didn't do it. It's because they have lots of other stuff to do. So I'm going to wrap this up. That was my ShakeTube for today, read to you from the Royal Shakespeare Company, Complete Shakespeare, the one of you sent, that I've been living with, absolutely living with, much to the dismay of the Shakespeare over my shoulder. This one right here, expected to be the Shakespeare that I would always grab when I needed one. Instead, it's been this forever. And I have a feeling I'm just going to read this until it falls apart, and then I will order the hardcover in a slipcase box. And that'll be a little more durable. I'll just read this one until it gives up the ghost. But that was my ShakeTube for today. It was a poem, Venus and Adonis, chosen by Jason. And all the rest of my choices for the next 2 weeks are Jason choices. So, so buckle up. And I'll wrap this up for now. I will leave a link to as many ShakeTube videos as are up to date. And I urge you to read some Shakespeare. Brush up on your Shakespeare. Take it down off the shelf and read it. Whatever it is. It doesn't have to be anything that we're doing. Whatever you like, or whatever you've tried to read or want to read next. September's a month for Shakespeare, regardless of whether we're doing it or not. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.